thank you, everyone. You know, around the world, but particularly in this region, the world's challenges are incredibly vast right now. But the potential of this region in particular is incredibly great. And Australia, uniquely connected across the Asia-Pacific region, can lead regional progress in health, equity, and sustainable agriculture. And that's why today we're discussing why now is the time to champion this region and how collectively we can all work together to make this happen. And so I want to give a really warm welcome to the Australian Shadow Foreign Minister, Simon. Simon, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be with you and with the amazing group that you've assembled here now. And thank you very much for bringing this event, this conference here to Australia at such a critical time.
Well, I might just, piggyback on what you're saying there, because right now, assembled here in front of us, you and the Foreign Minister have both spoken in the past about whole of nation. And right now, you've really got whole of nation here in front of you. You've got, cultural, music agencies. You've got businesses. You've got civil society. You've got nonprofits. You've got everyday citizens. But from your perspective, how do we partner together, with this idea of a whole of nation approach to tackle the biggest issues of our time?
Well, it's a really important phrase, and that whole of nation phrase, in part in Australian context, where Penny Wong and I were speaking about it, stems from some amazing work an organisation, AP4D, did with a strong paper looking at how we bring the different strands of statecraft together as tools for getting outcomes. And of course, looking at a global context, it's not just those tools of individual statecraft for nations like Australia, the diplomacy, the defence, the strategy that is so crucial, as well as the development agenda, but internationally, how you leverage all of those different tools between nations to achieve the type of peace and stability that is necessary for progress. Let's be very clear, in the type of challenged world we face, the first test is how do we actually underpin that peace and stability? Because you don't get development outcomes tragically in Myanmar or in Ukraine or in Sudan or in Gaza or in other locations of the world where you are a long way off of peace and stability. So that is a critical pillar and the first essential pillar for achieving outcomes. But from there, of course, how you actually achieve the type of economic growth driven by good development policies and good national policies that can incentivise the necessary investment and harness both public and private sector development assistance is critical. I'm a big fan of, one of my favourite books is Han Rosling's book Factfulness, which of course has shown how technology and innovation and development has achieved enormous outcomes for the world, and there's positive stories we've got to keep telling to underpin that type of need for development and assistance, but also, of course, learning from that as to how we can ensure in the areas where it has lagged, we make sure that we are delivering those fundamentals that are necessary in terms of stability, in terms of a positive investment environment, and in terms of long-term commitments that are necessary to get outcomes.
So one of the issues, which I know we were just backstage and we were speaking to some incredible organizations working on this, is the issue of hunger, right? Unfortunately, around the world and in this region, we're seeing record levels of hunger, people being pushed back into poverty. But we also know there's incredible organizations, one of whom is the International Fund for Agricultural Development, which I think Australia, not to put you on the spot, is the only G20 country that isn't part of it. But I guess from your perspective, we're an advocacy organization at the end of the day. From your perspective, what concrete steps can be taken? Australia's this agriculture superpower, but to really become a leader in terms of addressing, this acute challenge of hunger.
So we are proudly an agricultural superpower, and as a former trade minister, I know how strongly we value that, not just from an export sense, but in terms of the role we can play with other parties around the world. We formed the Cairns Group of Nations, all significant agricultural producing countries, and we've sought to expand that in terms of the cooperation we can have internationally. One of our least talked about, but I think most effective agencies is the Centre for International Agricultural Research, and the work that comes out of Canberra, but really leveraging huge amounts of Australian investment in agricultural research and development and making sure we are able to translate that across the world. The history with IFAD is a long one in terms of rolling through a number of different governments since Australia withdrew over concerns at the time about the efficiency of use of funds and whether or not they were sufficiently prioritised into our region and delivering outcomes there. But we had the chance this morning to use this forum, bringing people together to sit down, talk to IFAD from my perspective, understand how they have changed over that time. And I hope that can facilitate, hopefully, Australia's involvement and engagement in the future and ensure that we are playing the role we would want to play. This is a key area of capability for Australia, agriculture, and we should be leveraging all of the partners we possibly can to make sure that we are getting the outcomes in production and sustainability that are so essential there.
And I should say, we have the president of IFAD here later today, just after his first ever trip by an IFAD president to the Pacific, and he'll be sharing the stories, what they're doing in the region. But I want to turn quickly to global health, right? Very important issue. Earlier today, we had the Prime Minister of Timor-Leste, and we had an incredible organization, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, whom Bill Gates describes as the best investment he ever made. And they made an announcement that the HPV vaccine, which helps prevent cervical cancer in young girls, is going to be introduced in Timor-Leste later this year. And a lot of that's been made possible with Australian aid dollars, right? But to everyone here, how can, not just the government, but Australians as a whole and people in the region, how can we support rolling out these programs and getting support for vaccination or other global health programs for that matter?
Well, thank you. And again, it's a reminder, whilst we have incredible discussions in a forum like this, the other discussions that occur, be it with the President of IFAD or having the chance today as well to meet with Gavi and to talk about their work, is essential in terms of using these platforms to bring people together. And Gavi is a real standout. It benefits from the fact that it has a precise mission in terms of vaccines. It's a mission that people understand without really needing to have it explained, particularly in donor nations. People get the benefits of vaccines because the vast majority of the population have been educated about vaccines and therefore see that there is a real benefit in investing in helping other countries have access. Now, in terms of work to expand that footprint of vaccine work, we have to come back off of the disruptions of COVID, where it wasn't just in our countries, but tragically in far too many, we saw that some of the misinformation and concerns about government heavy-handedness have actually driven willingness to engage in vaccines backwards, and there is a real need for the education efforts to ensure uptake is restored. But I think it is an area where to get investment, both government and non-government driving forward, there are real opportunities because of the way in which people instinctively understand the health outcomes, and from those health outcomes, the reductions in childhood mortality, the increases not only in lifespans, but critically in productivity, and therefore all of the consequential benefits that can flow from that.
So I think message to everyone here, we should all spread the word, right? Aussie aid dollars is making an impact, saving lives in the region through vaccines. Vaccines work.
And of course, on that example, we're talking also about Australian technology in the first place as well. So it's a very proud one for us as a country. The R&D breakthrough, which has made a difference in terms of saving lives here, across much of the world, and now we're able to expand that through the type of contributions being made into countries like Timor-Leste.
So I'm glad you mentioned technology and research and development and sharing that, because that goes to my next question. Last question is on climate change. And we know in the audience we've got many representatives here from the Pacific and from around the world where climate change is a pressing issue. It's impacting vulnerable communities on the front lines hard. But right here in Australia, from your perspective, Simon, what are the concrete steps we can take to really build a bipartisan, if you want to call it, whole-of-nation approach to addressing climate change, both here in Australia but in our region?
So it is an area, and I've said this before, where I would wish to see, ideally, us be able to treat climate policies in the same type of way in which we've built largely strong national consensus around how we address national security policies, how we have a strong social safety net. That is not to say that each detail of those policy areas is uncontested, but that we actually share a common objective around where you want to get to, and from that you then have the policy contest around the ideas. And so the commitment in terms of Australian policy to net zero needs to be without question, and we need to make sure that we are committing through the Paris Agreement to those 5-year intervals around the steps to get there. Now, of course, there will be the divisions around how that is achieved, and we see that playing out in the different energy policies, but from our side, opening up discussions such as the difficult one about nuclear in terms of Australia's transition is a recognition that there are actually difficult discussions that have to be had, and hopefully it is a big step forward in that regard. But beyond our own domestic transition around our emissions profile, there are of course the other questions of resilience, of adaptation, and of support within the Pacific. And I think there is a strong level of bipartisan commitment in Australia to recognising our responsibility for our Pacific Island nation, neighbours and family, which is so essential. And that is part of the policy that we all bring to discussions like Global Green Climate Fund debates as to, is that a way to make sure we best get results in Pacific Island nations? Or is direct investment and direct partnership with those countries that are so proximate to us, with whom we have such a close relationship, the best way to do so? And that is part of the test that we all need to apply in those international engagements and discussions to ensure that if we are buying into broader global platforms and multilateral platforms for pursuing adaptation and resilience, how are we ensuring that some of the smallest nations who are closest and most proximate to us, with whom we have some of the deepest relations, don't get left behind or diminished in that? We want to make sure they remain right at the forefront of Australian contribution and support.
So I've heard two things there. You know, we've got bipartisan support, we agreed to net zero, everyone's agreed on that, and also the idea we have to set targets every 5 years, but it all comes down to the power of how and how we do that. And with that, I think we can all agree that we all have a role to play in that. That brings it back to whole of nation. Simon, I really appreciate you engaging with our conversation, being open, fielding these, and really taking the time to participate. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks again for the chance, and thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you. Cheers. Thanks.